This is James Arnold Taylor, voice of Obi-Wan Kenobi. Welcome to a more civilized podcast. This is the podcast you're looking for. You may not go about your business. Stay here, listen, and then move along.
Just a moment, dear listeners, before we get started. I just need to explain a little bit about this episode and why it's breaking our format just a little bit. You'll notice this episode is a part 1. I recently have started a new job, and the time limitations it has put upon me is making it a little difficult for me to edit a regular length episode. So we are breaking this episode into 2 parts. You'll find both episodes are about an hour long, so they're a little bit shorter than what we normally do. We didn't want to have to cut anything out and still keep it as a single episode. So please sit back and enjoy the first half of this episode, and we will get you the second half next week. The news will be in this episode, and the shoutouts and outro I am going to put on both episodes, just so you know what's going on and you don't wonder why we're talking about the same people twice. So again, thank you very much for your patience as we work things out, and please enjoy.
Well, welcome back, dear listeners, to another episode of A More Civilized Podcast. I'm Kyler.
I am Chris.
I'm Ross. We did it right this time, guys.
Hey!
It's been a few episodes.
It has been. Yeah.
I was really tempted to mess with it just for continuity's sake, but I wasn't thinking fast enough.
For those of you who follow our Twitter or have sneakily found me on Twitter, you'll know that I've been at Gen Con for 2 weeks.
But that was last week's episode, Kyler.
That was last week's episode. Magic of podcasting. Time traveling.
We just recorded a couple days ago, early in the morning, so we could have that podcast up, right? Remember?
And now I've had a few days to rest, and we're recording regularly. Regularly scheduled.
Before Ross leaves town.
Leaves town. Yeah, exactly.
For a weekend.
Summer
schedules. Yep, it is weird.
Actually, that's just family. We do that every month. So.
Lame.
Yeah, I've noticed.
What's more important, Ross? Family or this podcast? Don't answer that, please.
Especially because the other half of my family listens to this.
Yeah, I was going to say we don't want to insult your family on the podcast. Let's.
Oh, that's true. I think he was talking about Carrie, but you're right. Hi, Lindsay.
No, either way, we know what the answer is, but we don't want his family to hear what the answer is. We'll let them assume the other.
Yes.
Oh, so I have some Gen Con.
There's no way any of them will ever listen to this podcast. So
I have some Gen Con Star Wars related stuff.
Sweet, Gen Con us.
So first off, I don't know their names because I didn't ask, but I saw a really cool Hera costume there, which was pretty awesome. And cosplay, not costume.
Yes.
What am I thinking?
Yes.
Surprising lack of Star Wars cosplay this year, though. I was a little bit surprised. There was not as much. But the number of people with Critical Role paraphernalia was probably 4 or 5 times what it was last year.
They are getting huge.
It was like last year. My wife put it really well. She said last year it was kind of like Where's Waldo, and like you felt special when you found somebody with like a Critical Role shirt.
Yeah.
This year it was like every 10th person. It was crazy.
Yeah, I had a coworker just the other day that was like, "Hey, I've been listening to this podcast. It's basically just a couple people playing D&D together. It's really cool. You should listen to it. I'm trying to find more like it." And I was like, "Well, have you listened to Critical Role?" And she's like, "No, what is that?" And I was like, "Critical Role is the reason that all those other podcasts exist."
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
But I went to the Fantasy Flight Games in-flight report, and it was awesome. They dumped a whole mountain load of Star Wars news on us, which was freaking great. So Legion, they announced a whole bunch of stuff for Clone Wars. They announced the B-2 Super Battle Droid and Phase 2 Clone Troopers, which that was the no-brainer next release. They announced the AAT tank, the Trade Federation tank from Episode 1, which also was a no-brainer. And then I knew it was coming, but I think it's so ugly and dumb, I didn't want it to be, but it came anyway. The Saber tank for the Republic.
Yeah.
Which, it's such a dumb, ugly, whatever.
Is that similar to the ones that they had in Galactic Battlegrounds, right? I'm sorry, well, in Battlefront as well. Yeah,
that's what it is,
yeah.
Yeah, that's the Saber tank. Then they announced Captain Rex and Count Dooku, which I'm excited for. And they had models for all these there, which were great. Rex and Dooku look freaking sweet. And then they also announced a crashed escape pod as a terrain piece, but it also comes with R2 and 3PO.
Oh, that's nice.
That can be fielded by either the Republic or the Rebels.
Oh.
So that was kind of cool.
Yeah.
The Imperial Bunker was announced as a terrain piece with like its own set of objectives and stuff, and they said you can buy 2 of them and stick the backs together, and the doors, like, you can open it, like, make it like a big, like a full bunk thing. So I'll be getting 2 of those.
So they're starting to get into the terrain pieces now.
Yes, which I'm excited because they started with the downed ATST with its own like special objectives and mission kind of a thing. Now they're doing a little bit more. And then what else did they announce? A couple days after, it was actually on the way home from Gen Con, they announced like a heavy weapons specialist pack for each of the 4 factions. So you get different heavy options for your core units, which is kind of cool. And I think that was it for Legion. Most of that stuff is coming out in like Q1, like all the Clone Wars era stuff is coming out Q1, and the other stuff they're sprinkling out through the rest of the year. But then they announced the 2 sizable ships for Armada that we were promised back in like, was it April at Adepticon? So they announced what I suspected was coming was the Nadiri Starhawk from the Aftermath series, which was kind of cool because FFG, out of thin air, created the Imperial Raider class Corvette way back when Armada was first a thing in like 2015.
Yeah.
Then that design was so well liked by Lucasfilm and Disney that they said, we're going to take that ship that you guys created out of whole cloth and put it into Battlefront 2.
Yep.
And that's the Corvus. Which is really kind of cool to be like, I made a thing, and now it's an official
I made something
thing, you know?
that did so well that it is now part of the canon.
Yeah, way cool. Yes. And then they also... Is that the only ship that they designed out of whole cloth? I think so, because the others were based on previous images. Anyway, so I had long suspected that the Starhawk would be coming to Armada just because it makes sense. But no, there's never ever been an official picture of it. And so I thought, I bet Disney will let FFG be like, hey, here's the written descriptions that we have of it. Go. Yeah. You know? And so they did, which is kind of cool. And it looks really cool. You can, because one of the defining features, right, is that the prow of the Starhawk is made of the whole of like recycled ISDs. Huh. And it's really cool when you look at the model, you can see like, oh, there's the ISD in there, you know?
Huh,
it looks really, really cool. It's a big, fat, bulky ship. I was talking to Ross about it before Chris got here to record. It's a really cool looking ship. And then they announced a ship that I was excited for and then disappointed for and then excited for again. So I'm always excited for new Imperial ships, particularly big Imperial ships that can fire beyond long range in the game, because that means I can hit you from the start of the game. I don't have to wait for you to get close to me, which is going to be fun. The Onager class Star Destroyer has Kyber crystal weaponry on it. Ooh. So a way toned down version of the Death Star. Yeah. It can like blast through all but the strongest shields. It can blast mountains away so that they can get into rebel bunkers or whatever. That's the in-lore. And I was way excited because I'm like, oh, this ship sounds awesome. And then I was like, wait, but it's not canon and I have my silly rules that I live by. I'm not buying non-canon ships for Armada. So darn, I can't get this really cool ship. And then I was like, well, maybe. Just maybe it's canon somewhere and I can justify getting it. So to the Armada forums I went, and people were like, oh, look at this ship that's been mentioned in, I believe, like Force Awakens and like some of these other canon books called the Siegebreaker. And sure enough, there it is on Wikipedia listed as the Siegebreaker. It just wasn't listed as the Onager class, and it's canon. So I'm like, sweet, gonna get 3 of those. But the other cool thing, and it's gonna kick off our news... Ross, go ahead.
The newsiest news?
Nope, just the regular news.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Oh, and Kyler also got his Super Star Destroyer.
Oh,
yeah.
Which he was going to bring to show us, but he couldn't fit it into his van.
Yeah, so I had pre-ordered a Super Star Destroyer last year when they announced it at Gen Con. Literally, as soon as I got home, I was like, have a lot of money, Game Store. Pre-ordered me one of these whenever they get around to it, and then got tax returns in, and I was like, you know, a second one also sounds great. Here, have some more money. And I got a call at Gen Con. They're like, cool, so your Super Star Destroyer arrived. I'm like, awesome. I'm at Gen Con. You gotta hold it for like a week.
Now, I hope that ship comes with rules that if you destroy a squadron of A-Wings within range of it, then it can immediately potentially cripple it. Like
everyone has joked about those. Sadly, unfortunately, not the case.
Bummer.
But I am playing a game tomorrow against Steven with both of my SSDs, and it's going to be just great. Can't wait.
And you can go to the Facebook group to find out the results, because this will post well after that game happens.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll be on Twitter mocking Steven for his inevitable defeat. which is more likely to be my inevitable defeat.
I was going to say, if you talk about it that way, then that tilts the odds back.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
Well, like, we kind of shared lists, because I'm like, I don't want to bring, like, the exact same Star Destroyer you're bringing, like, so what are you bringing so that we can, like, see some different options on the table, you know? So he kind of told me, oh, this is what I'm bringing. I'm like, okay, well, I'll bring this and this and this then, and it should be pretty fun. I can't wait, though. I've got just, like, a bucket of dice ready to roll. It's going to be so great. Okay.
Tell us how that went, Stephen.
Yes.
So, well, was that all you wanted to say about our first item?
I think so. Well, you're going to do the other half of the onager. Oh, we got a segue.
Right,
yeah.
Whoa. Hey,
So-
speaking of the onager.
So it's being
Very
reported.
adequately segued.
So it's being reported that this Siegebreaker, this Onager Siegebreaker, will be showing up in episode 9. Now they're getting these leaks from a news site called Making Star Wars, which apparently has had a good track record for
They are very, very good track record in the past.
for giving us actual leaks. But the image that they show of this leak is just
The image
of the game piece. So
literally, yeah, they're like, oh, we've got leaked images of this ship that's going to be in episode 9. Here it is. And I clicked, I'm like, okay,
If
interesting.
by leaked you mean publicly released by Final Fantasy Games.
Yeah, exactly. So I clicked on it. I'm like, oh, it's literally the picture of the onager, like with all the game tokens and everything, straight from FFG's page.
now there is a bit of art in the background. Is that also from FFG?
Let me.
Here, I've got it right here.
Yes, that is some alt art from
'Cause-
FFG.
I mean, there are people that are speculating on, what planet is this that it's firing at or something like that.
Yeah.
But it's
It's literally like all of that is art specifically made for FFG's announcement of this ship.
so there you have it. This might be canon. Well, I mean, it is canon.
Might be movie canon.
Might be movie
top
canon.
level canon.
I hope we do see it. I mean, it's an interesting looking ship, and
and we haven't seen any sort of like siege type ships before. It's always just been ship to ship combat. But this looks like it was specifically designed.
Yeah, it's got like a big like rail gun basically on the front of it that it just nukes something from orbit.
Yeah. So I mean, it's a natural evolution of warfare to have something that can hit something a lot farther away than anything else. So here we finally have
longbow.
And it's supposed to be able to like punch through even like really heavy capital ship shields easily, which is like, okay, again, natural evolution of warfare. You got heavy shields, well, we make a bigger gun.
Yep.
So
yeah, that'll be interesting.
Yep.
Moving on our newsiest news, we have more Galaxy's Edge things to talk about. So apparently, we've talked about in the past how the Galaxy's Edge park is not as full as what it should be. And apparently that is bleeding out into the rest of the Disneyland park. Apparently attendance is down, and they're blaming Galaxy's Edge for it because people were wanting to again push off their vacations until the park was fully open. And
so if you can get to Anaheim right now, do it.
That's basically been the case for weeks. Is it's pretty much dead everywhere in the park. Like the longest lines are like 20 minutes.
Yeah.
In August. Wow.
Yeah. Well, and we're hitting right at the end of the summer of the school year.
Yeah.
So
if you've got Disneyland levels of spare cash around, get down to it.
Yeah. And finally, the bit of news that I'm most excited about was there's a new book that it was just announced this week. I haven't
heard about it.
Oh, well, there you go.
Nice.
Yeah, it's because you've been gone. Or haven't been gone. You've just been under a rock for a week. Anyway, that bit is old already, so we'll just continue on. No, they are publishing a book titled. Let's see, where's the title? I want to get it right because it's close enough to an old, no longer canon book. The Secrets of the Jedi. So there was an old canon book that was I think it was an Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon book with a similar title. But this is actually a new release from the point of view of Luke Skywalker, talking about the entire history of the Jedi Order. So, it is...
I want this book.
I know. I mean, that's all you had to say, and I was already interested. But it is beautifully illustrated, and it's all
my gosh.
It's all in Luke's voice. It's like,
So this is a novel, or is this
I mean, from what I understand, it's supposed to be more of like a reference, but in a person's telling.
Do they have a listed author, or is it?
Let me find out.
This sounds amazing.
Yeah.
Like, this is making my historian heart just
first of all,
happy.
there's the front cover.
Oh yeah, I've seen that floating around. That is
Yeah.
Wow, that's beautiful.
I mean, yeah, wonderful, wonderful illustrations.
I think I saw that like floating around, and I thought it was like maybe a fan image or something.
Yeah.
Interesting. That's great that it's official. That's fantastic.
And it's also, so let's see. This is supposed to be post Luke meeting Rey, because that is also mentioned in the book.
So this is them Octo, and he's like,
or post Octo, him ghosting
Force
her.
Ghost. Yeah.
I don't see an author.
Okay, so it is more reference then if they're not listing the author up front.
Yeah.
That's great though. That is
that's
so
cool.
excellent. Can't wait. Ooh, and
But-
it might give us clues about what Disney might do in the future. You know, like
Yeah.
if they talk about like the Great Sith War or something like that. You know, like who knows?
The pictures that they've showed, they've shared several of the spreads, and they're very comprehensive. I mean, they're all just like quick blurbs about, you know, like here we have a bunch of old Jedi Masters, you know, and you have like Qui-Gon and
Cool.
Shakti and just, you know, little blurbs about everybody.
Yeah.
But
I will link to that in the liner notes.
yeah.
That's way cool.
So I could not find a release date yet.
That was my next question.
Because I mean, it was just announced a couple of days ago, but they haven't
So probably next year then sometime.
probably.
Because if it was
Post
gonna,
episode 9.
yeah, if it was gonna hit at Christmas,
They would
already
definitely have a release
already.
date by now if it was going to be pre
Yep.
Rise of Skywalker.
Cool.
So I'm sure we'll have more to say about that as that gets closer.
Yes.
So be excited.
Cool.
I am.
And that's the newsiest news.
Alrighty then.
We really need like some dun dun, you know, at the end of Ross's. Like,
Yeah,
to cap.
I have a
bookend
good
it, you know?
opener. We need a good outro for it. Yeah.
Well, you just need a of the lightsaber turning off.
I like it. Ross, get on that.
We'll see.
Okay.
All right. So today's topic was pitched by Kyler at me,
Oh,
and
sorry. Pause.
oh,
Addendum. As I was continuing to read through the article about
Ross
the book.
interrupted me. Everybody.
I know.
Oh, that never happens.
The author is Mark Sumerak,
Cimarron. I do not know this, Mark.
who apparently did droidography and Jediography, which I
Fair
don't
enough.
know what those are.
I do not know this, Mark.
So there you go.
Cool. Congratulations on the book, Mark. All right. Yes, so this subject was pitched by Kyler at me and was like, hey, we should talk about this. Go.
Yep.
And I went, all right, yeah, I can do that, since he was busy at Gen Con up until 2 days ago, early in the morning when we recorded the last episode.
Yep. That's right.
So we're going to talk about the power of death in storytelling. We're going to talk about death in stories, the various functions it can serve, and then we're going to kind of loop back around and
Props
go,
to Ross
how does-
also for recording an episode that early in the morning, then turning
then
around
turning
with
around
the
and
editing
it that
still
fast,
having
right?
it out by 10:30 in the morning.
while at work?
While it worked, yeah.
I mean, Ross is amazing. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
It's so true.
Yeah.
Oh. I
One
also
more interruption.
misspoke. Yep.
We have a
November
release
19th.
date? Whoa. Okay.
Star Wars: The Secrets of the Jedi will be available November 19th. It was after an ad, so I didn't read that part
Ah,
before.
yeah,
That's
so,
fair. Ads are the worst.
Yeah.
They are.
November 19th. Isn't that also... Oh, no. So that's the week after Disney+. Plus.
Yes.
Yeah. And
I
it's,
will already be one episode deep into Mandalorian by that point.
It's already already open for pre-order as well.
Nice.
So,
Go get it, people.
Cool. All right.
damn.
Hey,
turning my
so
phone
one
off,
more
that's
interruption.
for sure.
Yes, please. I was waiting.
Go, Chris. No more interruptions.
Just checking.
It's tough to do long dramatic pauses. 'cause
I know. It's
automatically
going to get
cut
automatically
silence,
cut out.
so-
It's all
Yeah.
good. I figured that whole thing would get cut. I was
Yeah.
just waiting.
No, I think it's funny. I'll leave it.
Well, but you'll have to like work extra to leave it. Is that? I don't know.
No,
Anyway.
I mean it's more work to cut things out.
Oh, fair enough.
So, what'd you clap for? I'm gonna leave it all.
You're
No,
leaving
no,
all of
no,
it?
not that. You're okay. Sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, so storytelling is generally driven by conflict. It can be external conflict. It can be internal conflict, aka trauma or turmoil.
Your story's going to be a little boring if you don't have any conflict.
Exactly.
So-
And then it can happen. You can have largely conflictless stories, but they are by far the exception.
Can you think of, like, can you give us an example? Because I'm...
Off the top of my
trouble.
head, no, but it's seen more often in Eastern storytelling than in Western storytelling. Still pretty rare, but the closest I can think of off the top of my head would be a lot of Hayao Miyazaki's movies, where he'll have some that are a lot more calm and everyday, like My Neighbor Totoro, for instance, is like there is conflict in My Neighbor Totoro, but it is, for good portions of the movie, is largely just this exploratory like this girl running around and experiencing things. It's not very heavily laden with conflict. So it is possible, but it's rare, especially on this side of the pond. Most stories are the conflict is the whole point, and even as a writer, you're usually trying to inject as much conflict as you can into any given scene, which is why you so frequently have a, like the good cop, bad cop, the buddy cop dynamic where it's like, we're constantly at odds because we're just so different. And it is because it creates conflict, and because that's more interesting for people. Than it's generally a lot more interesting to see two people arguing about what we should do than two people going, should we do this? Yeah. And this? Yeah. Cool, let's go do it. Generally doesn't make for as interesting storytelling.
That's why this podcast works so well.
Yeah.
I can't stop arguing with either of you.
Yep, we agree. Anyway, see how boring that was, everybody.
Oh my goodness.
So, in real life,
doing on a podcast, guys.
Well, that was another one of those conflictless moments where you were like, "Hey guys, I want to do a podcast," and we went, oh, "Okay."
Yeah, that's pretty true.
Yeah.
So in real life, death or the threat of death is one of the most powerful and universal causes of both external and internal conflict. It causes turmoil for those threatened by it, those who are going through it, those who are inflicting it, and those peripheral to it. Like, it is painful for people facing death that are going to die or that are dying. It is painful both emotionally and physically, etc., etc. For the people inflicting it, it wreaks havoc upon people's psyches. It is painful for all the people who have to lose loved ones. Like, it is one of the great universalities of this world, and and it's the greatest finality. Like, historically, very few cases of reported survivals of death, and even those are highly contested. So it's about as universal as anything can get.
Yep.
And so it often finds place in storytelling. A lot. Like, if you go through, just go through a list of, I read an article that had a list of the top 25 movies of all time, and it was like, that list is very saturated with death. Like, it's left and right. Some of the best scenes of all times that people can all remember as, like, gut-punchy emotional things are all centered around death. The big one I like to reference is Mufasa.
Oh, I was going to say Wash.
Wash I was going to bring up. Oh, by the way, death is also the great bringer of spoilers in stories, so just be aware. We're going to be talking pretty loose and fast with deaths. Pretty sure you all know the Star Wars ones we're going to talk about, but this will also dip into all sorts of other areas. What? Well, so you're going to hear Serenity spoilers and Death Note spoilers and who knows what else spoilers. Just be aware. Lion King spoilers. Sorry, everybody. Mufasa dies.
Dang it, Chris. I was going to go see that new movie.
Yeah. What?
Yeah.
Why would you ever do that?
I wouldn't.
I know. I hear it's an interesting exercise. Like, it does in some interesting things, but again, I don't need to see it. Anyway, of course we're talking about the original Mufasa's death. Yeah. We're talking about the animated, the hand animated. I hate having to make these distinctions, Disney. Gah! The hand-animated, traditionally animated Lion King from 1995.
Wait, but I thought this new one was live action. You're telling me they didn't have live Sorry,
no,
I can't resist making fun of Disney's dumb choices on that.
Yeah. But yeah, that is a gut punch of a scene. Like, we all know that scene. Yeah. We all know, and now that we're getting older, we know the feeling of watching this with children and going, oh no, what am I about to inflict on my children? Do I want to do this to my children?
That's what Chris says. I'm just going, yes. Keep your eyes open, children. Don't look away.
My son is a much more delicate flower than your daughters.
That's true. They're kind of brittle.
He is a very soft soul. And I don't mind. I'm proud of him because I'm not. And so it's like, I can respect that. My 3-year-old, on the other hand, no, don't cross that kid. He will cut you. It appears everywhere in storytelling. Death can serve many purposes. Most of the time, death is meant to be visceral, painful, devastating, emotional, like difficult to deal with, like it is in life. So most of the time, death is meant to be a painful thing in storytelling. Like, it's a difficult thing to deal with. Wash in Serenity is a very solid example of this. Wash is very high up on my list of deaths in stories that just don't ever get easier to deal with, no matter how many times you see them. It's always just such a gut punch, and it was super effective there.
Oh, it's true. Like, I've seen Serenity, I don't know how many times. A lot. I know that it's coming, and every single time I am always, like, bracing myself, like, oh, here it comes. Oh!
I have to do
gosh!
it again.
Oh, are you?
Yep.
Oh, man, really? Really? Still, Joss Whedon, really? You know,
You're still doing this?
Yeah.
You
like,
haven't gone back and given us a special edition where he survives? Come on, Joss.
Like, you know, and I've seen it several dozen times.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? I love that show. And, yeah, you're right. It's hard to watch every time. Just,
yeah.
Man,
now,
you know?
There's all sorts of debate that could be had about why that matters. But I think in the main thing with death in storytelling is that storytelling is stories are a safe place to deal with death. Like, without it having to be too real, too painful. That's part of why The Lion King is, you know, it's a family movie, and it's got one of the most gut-punchy deaths in it of cinema history. And that's okay, because this is something all kids are learning to deal with. You know, it's like most people, I remember when I first became aware of the concept of death as a permanent, inescapable thing, was when I had, like, I got some goldfish from somewhere, I don't remember where, they died, and I was just like, what? How is this even a thing? Like, they're gone, they're just gone, there's nothing we can do? And that's, you know, it's, ever since then, it's been a long, bumpy ride for all of us, right? We all...
Yeah, everybody's got that moment where they understand, like, beyond an intellectual level that death is a thing, and it's coming.
For my son, it was when his beta fish and the dog both died in the same night.
Whoa!
It was a rough day.
Remember that story. Yep.
Yeah. But yeah, but stories offer us a safe place to explore the difficulties that we're dealing with there. And, you know, if a story is done well, a character's death can be almost as brutal as a real-life death. And we've all seen examples of that. I driving home from Avengers Endgame with my wife sobbing in the seat next to me was freaking hilarious. But like, I was laughing my head off, and she's like, "Shut up, you cried too." And I was like, "I did tear up, it's true, but this is just hilarious." Like, come on, you're sobbing your eyes out over the death of the Marvel Cinematic Universe's greatest villain. I mean, come on. But anyway,
I still haven't seen it.
Yeah, I know.
I don't
but
care.
there's some more spoilers. Everybody knows at this point, right? Yeah. We all know that
Thanos
Iron Man
dies, right?
Iron Man died. The greatest villain, I said. Thanos was only the second greatest villain of that cinematic universe.
Oh, that's right.
Number of movies where Thanos is either the cause of or an accelerant for the primary conflict in the movie. 4.
Yeah.
Number of Marvel Cinematic Universes where Iron Man is either the cause of or the greatest accelerant for the conflict in the movie. 6. So,
there you go.
Causes as many problems as he solves.
There we go.
Anyway.
My kind of guy.
That was for you, Victoria. I've debated this often with my friend, and it's a lot of fun.
Does she listen?
No, she doesn't.
Aw.
I might just tell her to listen to this episode just to catch her off guard with that. Anyway.
And Chris is this podcast's greatest villain.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's true. No, she's smart, though. As soon as I tell her, like, oh yeah, it's a story, it's about death, she'll be like, shut up! I know what you're doing. This is about Iron Man, isn't it? You're like, dang it. No, it's, yeah, okay, it was about Iron Man. But yeah, they can be very visceral. There are a lot of fans that have had extreme emotional reactions to character deaths. Aerith from Final Fantasy VII is a good example of this. Yeah. Like, that was really gut punchy for a lot of people, I'm told. I've never actually played through that one. Either. But, like, enough so that people created mods that would allow them to keep her in their party, even though she had no dialogue or any interaction and didn't change anything else. Everyone else is still mourning her. She's just there, which I'm like, that's worse, guys. That is worse. This is a great example of how not to deal with death. That's basically the equivalent of stuffing your loved one's corpse so that you can keep it there in your house and pretend they're still alive.
Ooh.
So sometimes storytelling is a way for people to exercise unhealthy reactions to death, but usually it's a way for them to learn to cope with these sort of difficulties in a somewhat safe and restricted environment where they don't have to deal with the full harsh realities of it. And, you know, depending on the situation and how well you react to media as real stories, your suspension of disbelief and everything, it can be very effective for some people. Other people, less so, you know, and depending on what you go through in real life, but so that is, I think, the greatest use of death in storytelling is just that it's a coping mechanism, it's a learning tool. But it also makes stories more impactful, makes them more real, brings them down to earth, like to a real place for us. It can be a lot of things. It can be humorous. Death can be humorous in storytelling. That's my
Looney Tunes has proved that over and over again.
yeah. Well, Looney Tunes doesn't necessarily kill them.
Yeah.
My favorite example of this is Stardust, the movie version, because I haven't read the book, but
I love
the
that
adaptation of Neil Gaiman's book, Stardust, is riddled with deaths. Aside from the central, like the princes all being killed off one by one, and their humorously corpseified ghosts appearing after they die.
Yes. Terribly funny.
Yeah, it's all done for humor, but even then, there's deaths left and right throughout that movie. Like I remember the first time I watched it, I was like, oh, this is kind of like Princess Bride, except everybody dies. Like this is just brutal left and right. Like yeah, and it's pretty harsh. Like yeah, there's a lot of those, but it is humorous. It's funny, like watching all these people die and being like, that one died too. And you can do that in storytelling too. You can laugh at death, which is also another way to cope and heal dealing with these painful things. It can be motivation for a character. And it's like, I have to avenge them, I have to prevent this death, I have to avoid my own death. Very common motivation in storytelling. It's Luke's initial motivation in Star Wars. His initial kick to get through that final moment of I'm going to go out and do it is his aunt and uncle dying. Largely gets forgotten after that. Which we'll discuss in a bit, but like that's a very common. I have to avenge a death. John Wick with his dog and or car, like mountains of death in response to a comparatively small event. Preventing someone from dying, very common. That's Anakin's motivation, and Luke's later on. Like that's a very common motivation. And avoiding your own death, as basically any Hunger Games battle royale. We're going to drop you in an arena. Well, avoid death. Deal with having to cause death. Like these are all very common. It can be an obstacle. It can just be something we have to get past. Like, oh, useful character is dead. Now what do we do? Like we have to get past this. We have to get over this. It's just heightened. Yeah, it heightens the difficulty level. It can raise the stakes. This is one of the things I like to reference with Wash's death in Serenity. Is that we all know we've all watched enough movies to even if we're not thinking of it this way to instinctively know that we have shifted gears. We are into third act territory and action is happening and it's intense, and then we safely land and boom, nobody is safe. Like where the second Wash dies there, it's like anybody could die. This is it. The TV show got canceled. It's not being brought back, guys. They can kill anyone.
Yep.
And he doesn't.
So painful.
He doesn't kill anyone else after that of significance.
Yeah, but
he doesn't
the
even
threat
kill
is
the
there.
operative.
Yeah.
Which is one of the things I really like about that. We'll get into that later. But it definitely raises the stakes for everyone watching that movie. Even on repeat viewings, that it has that impact where you're feeling that death is possible for these characters, even though you already know how it ends, that you still feel it. And so a well done stakes raising death can do that, where it's like, oh, people are dying. People can die. Like Ned Stark dying in the first book / season of A Song of Ice and Fire is just like, holy crap, this is like the main character just got killed off. Like anybody can die here. And it's definitely a useful tool for making people fear for your characters, connect to your characters, believe that the stakes are real here. Or it can be ancillary and largely ignored. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean that sometimes death happens and it's not important to the story. It's not a huge deal. It's just, yes, it happens. Like, we have dealt with all of the Nazis that were chasing us. It's not important that they all died. They just did. They're dealt with. We could have not killed them too. None of that is important. All that matters is there was a problem. Now there is not. Moving on. Right? And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Ignoring death, making it ancillary or ignored can be very bad. It basically depends on knowing how you're using death in the story. Like, if you know that the deaths of these Nazis are not important, you just need to know that they're out of the way, that's fine. That's not a problem. Indiana Jones can knock a bunch of them, kick them out of the car, we all know they die, oh well, move on, doesn't matter.
Yep.
Especially because they're Nazis, right? And actual Nazis, like, they've got it on the shirt. Right there, I am a Nazi. So, that's okay. But if you want your death to be impactful and you're accidentally making it ancillary or unimportant, that is a significant problem. It matters to know how you're using death. If you want your death to be meaningful and you have unintentionally made it humorous, that's gonna be some great, like, riff tracks material, but it's not gonna make for a good movie that people are genuinely moved by.
I would say most of the deaths, if not all of them, in the pod race from episode 1 would be, I think, probably supposed to be trying to raise the stakes.
Trying to
about
raise the
see
stakes,
how dangerous this is. But they're just so dumb and comical that it's like, okay.
Yeah. And that's one of the things I was going to mention. Yeah, with those very specifically, those are very clear stake-raising deaths. And as we've seen with, like I said, with Wash's death, it's like, even on repeat viewings, that does succeed on raising the stakes, even though we already know how it ends. Phantom Menace, even in first viewings, did not manage that in the race. And even if these characters had been characters we knew, it probably wouldn't have made that much difference. We all knew that Anakin can't die. We all know that he's gonna win. So it just, there are better ways to raise the stakes or raise the tension or just make that scene interesting than trying to rely on, oh, people are dying, ooh, especially when the movie's clearly doesn't care about those deaths.
Yeah.
Like, I like a counter example that I would give to that one is Attack on Titan, which I know you haven't seen, Kyler. You actually should, though. That might be an anime you could get behind. But have you seen it, Ross?
No.
Okay. Well, I'm going to give some spoilers here. I'm going to drop some. Maybe it wouldn't be then. So in the second half of the first season, we get introduced to a bunch of new characters we've never met before. We go out on a mission, and then they all die brutally. And you realize that, oh wow, like literally the last 4 episodes of setting up these characters was literally just so that I would care when they died. Like, that's the only reason we spent this much time with these characters, is just so we could kill them and have it hurt. And it works. It really worked, though. That's the thing, is like, even as a writer, where I was watching that and going, oh, you're just doing this. You're just trying to invest enough time in these characters that I will now care about them when they die, and it will make me worried for other characters. Yeah, good job. That totally worked. Like, they get picked off just right in a row, and it is brutal, and it is scary, and it is jarring, and just like, oh my gosh, we're not in territory that I thought we were in. People are dying, and it definitely raises the tensions. It does a great job of it. Where the pod race is a very good example of not raising the tensions. I almost said the podcast, which is also a great example of not raising the tensions. We don't have enough conflict here, guys.
Really?
Sorry, I'll try to be more argumentative.
No, don't.
Ross is just over there. Whatever.
Yeah.
So, I also wanted to analyze real quick some tropes that tend to undermine the effectiveness of death. This is not universal. You can still have these tropes occurring in your stories and make it work, but just they can undermine the effectiveness of death for some of those higher level gut punchy stuff and raising stakes and all of that. So first are the non-permanent deaths. Any version of this, you've got the Disney death trope, which is basically is the Snow White. It's like, oh no, the protagonist is dead, but wait, not really. Frozen has that. Like, it's all over. There's a reason it's called the Disney death. Because we routinely have stories where it's like, it looks like they're dead with Sleeping Beauty and Snow White in the early days, but then later with Finn Rider and with Anna and so many others. And then it turns out, nope, never mind. They're not dead. And you can do that well. Like, Frozen is actually a pretty solid example of this. Even Flynn Rider's not bad, where it's like, yes, we all know they're not really going to die, but it at least has thematic ties to their character arcs and what they've been going through. Arguably, Anna doesn't really have a character arc, but I can get into that later. But
save it for our Disney episode.
Yeah. But Finn Rider very much does, and so at least there is payoff there. There is meaning to it. Anna's death very much does have meaning. There's a point to it beyond just, oh no, things didn't turn out well. Like, she's sacrificing herself for a good cause, and then because it's a Disney movie, she survives anyway. Cool, that's great. But at least it has that resonance. It has that tie-in. Whereas a lot of them, it's just like, nope, they just survived at the end because magic or handwave, or turns out they weren't that injured. That's a very common one where it's like the fake. So I've got the Disney death here, which I did also want to, in Disney, give props to the death of the what's his name, the lightning bug in Princess and the Frog, which was effective precisely because we all expected a Disney death there, and we didn't get it. It was a real death. He gone. Nicely done. Like, It was jarring, but it was good. You get resurrections of various sorts, all sorts of, especially in sci-fi and fantasy, there's all sorts of ways to bring people back from the dead.
Looking forward to that episode 9.
Yeah, well, I was going to get into this. Like, this is why I have some fears with what they're showing us with episode 9, is because what they're showing us so far definitely seems like it could veer into some really death undermining tropes here. So you got, resurrection. It can be time travel resurrection. It can be magical, tribal blood resurrection that's just lame. It can be, all Vulcans, have a potential to come back to life, or whatever it was in The Search of Spock. I don't remember.
No, his
Search for
consciousness
Spock.
was
was transferred to another. Yeah,
Yeah.
like it's just, there's all sorts of ways to avoid death. The best example of this happening is superheroes. Just leave it at that.
Yeah.
Superhero comics in particular, but the movies have also adapted a lot of that. You get faked deaths and fake deaths. So the faked death is when a character fakes their death for whatever reason. This is Nick Fury in Captain America: The Winter Soldier. And then the fake death is when the author goes out of their way to make it look like this character has taken a mortal wound and is dying or whatever, and then it turns out, oh no, they didn't. They just didn't. And that is almost worse for me, where it's just like, oh, so you lied to me. That's how you got your drama, is by lying to your audience, making it look like this was a mortal. Which, I mean, it can be effective. That can happen in battle, right? Where it's like, crap, they're dead, and then you come back and it's like, oh, okay, no, they're not dead, thank goodness. Okay. Like, that's plausible. It's not unrealistic. But if you overuse it, it can be irritating. One example I give for this, for me at least, like this, and this can be very subjective, obviously, is the last battle in The Wheel of Time, which did kill off a decent amount of characters, but also had a surprising amount of fake deaths, where it's like, just littered here and there, where it's like, oh, it turns out Galad's not dead. Oh, it turns out Fael's not dead. Oh, it turns out so-and-so's not. Like, turns out Matt's not dead. Turns out this, like, left and right. People seemingly dead and then turning out not to be dead. And it was like, too much of that. I would have rather he just started killing people. But, so that's the non-permanent deaths. Anytime death can be reversed, you have strong potential to lose the effectiveness of death as a storytelling device. I really like The Order of the Stick as an example of how to keep death as a revolving door and still have it have story impact, where in midway through the current run, a character of great significance died, and this is a D&D world, so we all know that any cleric of high enough level can cast Raise Dead and bring people back. Yep. And so we put in some understandable, believable obstacles to making that happen. That character ended up spending an entire book dead, and so by the time they finally managed to get them back, it really felt like that death had meaning. Like, it was okay, even though death is a revolving door, and sometimes they do use that in that comic, where it's just like, hey, yep, he died, but we brought him back. Cool, moving on. Like, Jirix.
It's such a good...
Order of the Stick is just excellent in every sense, but... And then later they kill another character, and again, it's a huge obstacle, but done differently than the last one. So death retains its significance in the universe of Order of the Stick, despite the fact that it is very easily solved.
Yep.
And so that is go read Order of the Stick.
Yeah.
I don't know how many times we've said that on this podcast. If we've said it this many times and you still haven't gone and read it, shame. Shame.
Shame.
So then you get...
Shame.
Yes. Then you get the unnoted deaths tropes. So you have deaths that get forgotten. Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru.
Yeah.
It just kind of gets forgotten. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Like I said, these tropes aren't necessarily bad, but they can undermine the deaths. Like, when Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru initially die, it is a bit of a gut punch. Like, it's not the worst one we've ever seen on screen, but it's not a bad one.
Yeah.
And then it's just largely discarded, and that's okay. Like, it's not a horrible choice for these movies. It's not the kind of movies we're watching. Not everything has to be Game of Thrones. It's not everything has to be... Not every death has to be obsessed over. Like, you can't do that, especially in stories where there's a high death count. Oh, by the way, sorry, Mark, that this episode on death is not the one that you mentioned to us. We will be doing that.
That is coming up, though.
Yes. But, it's like Full Metal Alchemist has a death early on in the story that impacts the rest of the story going on out. Like, that happens in, like, volume 4 or 5. It's a 27-volume story, and it continues to have repercussions throughout the whole story. Like, that death has meaning. A lot of other deaths that happen there aren't necessarily as meaningful as that one, but they do have meaning. Like, people continue to be weighed down by or motivated by the people they have lost, and it keeps coming up. Whereas sometimes, like, say, the death of Alderaan, it's like, really, logically, this should have had at least some emotional impact on Leia, but apparently didn't. It's like, people like to be like, oh yeah, Leia's so tough. They should have made Leia the protagonist because she's so much tougher than them. It's like, really? Because it seems like Leia's a sociopath. Like this is psychopathically like this isn't I can deal. This is I'm not concerned. Like, oh well. And that's
well, it does give rise to that excellent meme though, after Luke loses Ben. And it's like, sure, I just lost my entire planet, but let me comfort you.
Yeah,
Think about this, like,
exactly.
man, you just barely met.
And that's exactly, when you get a disparity like that in a story, it can be a little awkward if you pause to think at all. So the forgotten death, the ignored death, where it's just like, we're not going to pay attention to this. So this is another endgame one, where it's like, oh no, a character died. So did others, but we're just going to briefly mention them with a couple other characters, but nobody really cares. Natasha doesn't get a funeral. And then you have deaths that just are inconsequential. Like if death is not really noted, then well, it doesn't really have much weight. The death of all the pod racers is again an example of this, where it's like they don't raise the stakes, even though that's what they're trying to do, because there is no consequence to any of these deaths. It's that nobody is grieving these deaths. We don't get a moment to see someone in the pit crew going, no! Which, I mean, I don't blame them for not including that in Star Wars The Phantom Menace.
Even though it shows one of the pod racers who dies, his family is in the crowd.
Yeah.
And it shows that before the race starts. He like waves to his wife and kids.
Yep.
And he's like one of the first ones to go. And there's no like...
See, and I can see why they would make that choice. Like, they don't want to go that dark. Death can be dark. But again, that's the point of using death to raise the stakes, is that it is painful and scary, and in order to make your audience believe that, you have to show it being painful and scary. And all we really get is Shmi wincing a bit as every racer dies and goes, oh no, I'm worried for Anakin. And we're like, well, we're not, so...
Yeah, so calm down, woman.
Yeah. He's a protagonist, don't you know that? For now.
Oh.
Anyway, so if a death is not given weight, it can really undermine its goodness. That's what I'm saying. If it's unnoted or forgotten or ignored. Then you get predictable deaths. Or the predictable lack of a death can also be equally effective at this. So you get the mentor-parent death. Very common. Uncle Owen, Aunt Beru, Obi-Wan. And we were discussing before this, and Ross cut me off so I could say it here. So, dive into here's...
Yay.
Aren't
we glad?
Yeah. Is part of the problem with this is not so much that Star Wars did this badly and predictably, as that Star Wars is part of the reason a lot of these formats are so predictable now. Is that, like, we all know, oh, the mentor character has fulfilled their role, time for them to die. Saw Gerrera's death is not surprising in the slightest to anyone.
Yeah.
Just because, well, he barely served a purpose before this, and now he's done, so this is where he dies. They didn't really give him a reason for that. That's why it's problematic. Like, there's no weight to it. There's no reason for it. He just dies because that's where he's supposed to. It's and it's even more predictable for that.
Yeah.
It's
the problem when you do something so well that everybody is like, well, they did it really well. Let's do, like, you know what I mean? Like the original trilogy, Star Wars, like, it did so many things so well that everybody afterwards is like, well,
yes,
that worked for them. Let's do it.
And it's true that this was also George going like, what makes a story effective? Let me distill that down to its essence. And then everybody else going, wow, that's a handy guide. Like, that's literally just a step-by-step playbook right there that you distilled down to its perfect form. Like, cool, let's just do that. And that happens a lot.
It's too perfect.
Yeah, it is. Where too many people are doing this because that's what you do, and the audience can feel it and knows and can see the deaths coming because of that. Another one is the final battle villain death, which is actually one of those lack of a death, where it's like, we know when the villain is supposed to die. So when you have a conflict between the hero and the villain halfway through the story, generally speaking, we know that neither of them are going to die, and it loses a lot of weight because of that. This is one of the reasons I ended up liking Snoke's death in Last Jedi, because it's like, well, that wasn't supposed to happen for another movie and a half. Mm-hmm. Wow. Okay, we're going somewhere else. I am excited. I like going different places.
So do you think that lessens the impact of Vader and Luke's fight on Bespin?
No, but largely because...
Right, because that is a fight between the main protagonist and antagonist that isn't supposed to happen yet as far as a final battle goes. So you know both of
generally
them are going to go
speaking,
away.
when you have a battle between the hero and the villain before the end, we know that this is a dangerous... The danger here is to the hero.
Right.
and it's going to be, and generally we know they're going to survive, but we know they're going to be put through some sort of ringer.
Right.
And they're going to lose a hand is the usual trope because of Empire Strikes Back. It can still be like I said, this isn't an ineffective thing. There's nothing wrong with following these formulas. They're effective for a reason. They're still good. And even if you're just following them predictably, it's like comfort food for a lot of people. It's like, I know how this goes. I'm happy here. Let's keep going. And that's fine.
That's essentially the Marvel movies, right? They're basically all the same.
Oh yeah, very much
but
the Marvel
hey,
movies. That's what Rogue One is doing. It's very much,
Yeah.
and that's not a bad thing when I say that about Rogue One. It's not bad that it's following this formula. That's fine.
I compare it to mac and cheese. It's like, I know there are lots of like really good, like homemade, artisanal, blah, blah, blah mac and cheese. But I tell you what, sometimes good old blue box craft,
Absolutely.
that just hits the spot. I know it's processed.
That's
I know
exactly
it's not necessarily
what it is,
good quality, but I just want it sometimes.
Yeah. It's one of the most, it's decreasing in popularity these days, but for decades, one of the most popular book genres in existence was the Harlequin romance. And yes, there is some variety of character and exactly how we're going to get, why these characters can't get together, how they will get together. But all in all, we all know how the story's gonna end. They're gonna end up together. It'll be fine. There's not going to be much conflict. Like, they're going to get together and be done with
will
conflict,
they, won't
basically.
they is more of the will they, when they.
Yeah, exactly. How they.
Yeah.
And usually it's not a bittersweet thing in a Harlequin romance. It's not, well, we got together, but it might not work. Or it's no, we got our happy ending. Let's move on. Like, we're good. We might still be fighting, but it's cute fighting now. Like, it's okay fighting. We're okay with, we at least both know we're in love while we're fighting. And so, like, these aren't bad things, but they can, if they get too predictable, it can be bad. We've all watched movies or read stories where it's like, oh, well, okay, we're gonna have a hero-villain conflict right now. I know that nothing's gonna happen there, so, oh well. And then, yep, nothing happened. Hero got hurt. Oh, shucks. Not really surprised by that. One of my examples that I like of this is, most Disney stories have a moment of this. Kingdom Hearts, the original Kingdom Hearts video games, is one of these where you end up confronting Riku, and Riku steals the Keyblade and leaves, and it's like, oh no, what has happened? It's not that surprising. Nobody's surprised that Riku doesn't kill Sora. Nobody's surprised that Sora doesn't kill Riku. It was pretty ho-hum for me when I hit it. He took the key, and I was like, oh, huh, well, that's a bummer, I guess. And then I started fighting, and I was like, I'm really ineffective without that key. I guess I'll get that back in just a minute. And then I did. And it's like, well, not much of a surprise there. Like, it's a little too predictable. Then there's the redemption equals death trope, where, well, villains looking like they're going to be a good guy, so that means they're going to die.
So the Kylo Ren death.
Potentially.
Yeah.
Hopefully not.
That'd be interesting.
But that's the Vader death, obviously. Mm-hmm. And part of the reason this happens is because, we discussed in our what's going to happen to Kylo Ren episode that it's redemption is often not so clear cut as I'm a good guy now. Yeah. It's like, oh, good, congratulations, I'm glad you've repented, you're a good guy. You're still responsible for the horrible crimes you've committed, and we're going to put you on trial and all of this, like, because logically that's what would and should happen. And for storytelling, getting bogged down in trial and all that is not necessarily, if that's not the genre you're in, that's not a good thing to go through. So redemption equals death is a really easy way to be like, they're redeemed, and now we don't have to deal with any of these difficulties. They're just dead. That's why it shows up so much, particularly in action-heavy genres that like Star Wars is in. But the problem is, it becomes predictable. It's like, oh, the bad guy's becoming good. Starting that countdown clock now.
Yeah.
And there we go. Yep. Okay. Oh well. And yeah, that happens a lot. And the plot armor trope is a lack of death, where it's like, we know this character is too significant to die right now, which is why some of my favorite deaths in history are ones where it's like, wait, but they were too important to die, how did you kill them? Wash, not quite. Like, it's jarring because we didn't expect it to happen, but we're in third act territory. This is signaling, hey, the plot armor is gone, and that's what makes it scary. Whereas Ned Stark, for instance, is one where I'm like, no, he's the protagonist. Like, yes, there are 8 viewpoint characters in that book, but he is very clearly the main one. Yeah, he's very clearly the main character of that book, and then he dies with 100 and something pages left in the book. Like, it was very jarring for people. My other favorite example is from Death Note. Elle's death in that. Like, this is a game of cat and mouse, like detective hunting down the villain. The villain is our main character. The detective is hunting him down, trying to catch him, stop him from doing all these crimes. They're going back and forth. And then the villain wins, and our detective is dead. And it's out of left field. And it's one that is like, every time I read it, I'm just like, it still hits. It still hurts. Elle is dead. I still can't believe he did that. And then then the story goes on for 5 more books. Like, it's, and arguably never quite reached the heights it had in those first 7 books. But nevertheless, that death is so jarring, so unexpected, and so painful that it's worth it to me. Like, it's okay that it never quite recovers from that because, well, you know what? I never quite recovered from it either. So, so when we abandon the plot armor, we can have some really awesome things happen. Then the final group is just unimportant deaths, where I mentioned before that it's not necessarily bad to have the Nazis dying and it not being mentioned, but it can be bad if we wanted it to have weight. And so this particularly happens with unknown characters dying. That's part of the problem with the racers dying in the pod race is we don't know who any of these people are. Like, visually we can distinguish them all from one another, but that's not the same thing as knowing these characters.
Yeah.
And so their deaths don't have much weight, whereas Attack on Titan took several episodes helping us get to know these characters, like these characters, putting them through a bit of a ringer with the main characters so that we could all see, wow, these are great people who are doing good things, and they are brave and courageous, and they're dead! Oh my gosh. And so if you don't get us to know the characters, it can often be less effective. You can still make unknown characters, or the next one that I have listed here is faceless masses, like Alderaan. Like, Alderaan could have been more impactful. And again, not necessarily not necessarily complaining that it wasn't. Like, it's not necessarily a bad decision. But if they had chosen to, the death of an entire planet and all the people on it, whoa, that could, like, if you just say that out loud, that should be very weighty in real life. Choosing not to in story, that's some shaky ground, arguably.
If we're going to mention Alderaan, we need to mention not 1 but 2 Death Stars.
Absolutely.
Taken out by rebel terrorists.
2 Death Stars, 5 planets of the Hosnian system later on, and then faceless deaths in Return of the Jedi, actually very specific, not Return of the Jedi, The Last Jedi very specifically relies on a bunch of, on the weight of mass deaths, of we're picking off the resistance in slews, and we're left with a tiny bit at the end, which is arguably a decent way to do that, where it's like, as long as you're getting the impact of, oh my gosh, look how many people are left, like that has impact. Whereas, what was the other faceless death? I was forgotten. Oh well. Here, let me check. I have a handy list of every death of any significance in all the Star Wars movies. Here we go. So we're going to delve into the Star Wars movies in particular, and how they have used death, where they've used it well, where they maybe didn't use it as well as they could have, and maybe what they could do in the future that we might like to see from their deaths, and whether or not they need to step up more deaths. Like, again, they don't need to be Game of Thrones, but...
Thanks, Chris, for preparing that.
Why, my
for
pleasure.
us.
I'm always happy to engage in our podcast.
Yeah. Well,
you don't need to thank me.
This was like, this was kind of your episode.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your
thanks. Be sure to follow us on Twitter @MoreCivilized, and join our Facebook group, More Civilized Podcast. Both of those things allow us to interact with you, the listeners, a lot more, which we enjoy. We enjoy getting to know you guys, so please do that.
And our favorite listeners this week in particular.
Oh, hey.
On that note, by the way, we love interacting with you guys so much, and we are so tickled and thrilled, and whatever other little crazy words you wanna use to express how happy we were that this all worked. Yeah, I know, right? That's what you're here for. That our practical joke worked.
Yes.
Oh,
we finally got a response out of
Yes.
Kelsey, and it all went flawlessly.
That was so great.
So again, all of you
Yep.
are our very favorite and dear listeners.
We appreciate you helping us troll another listener.
And also, thanks Kelsey for taking that well.
Yeah. I enjoyed the
fallout.
Yeah, the Keenan. I heard that. I enjoyed that meme when she posted that. I was like, yeah.
So, you can also talk with me on Twitter @Mr_R_Star.
You can find me on Twitter @ItinerantBaxter. And you should hop on Twitter or Facebook and let us know if there are any subjects you'd like to hear us talk about. Anything Star Wars related.
Continue doing that.
Yeah, continue doing that. Thank you, Mark
Burdett,
Burdett, for your recent one. We've had some other great ones as well. Those will be coming up in the future. Some on very vague and unspecified amount of time in the future. Yep. We will get to those.
Yes, Lindsay, we're getting to that
but we are always open for more and really excited to be able to pander to our listeners.
Yep.
Absolutely.
And also, we are coming up on the 1-year anniversary of this podcast. We have something special planned for it. So, hopefully by the time this airs, I will have been prepared enough to get this going. If not, sorry, I'm only adequate. But we want to hear, like, my goal is I'm going to do, like, the little, like, Google survey thing.
Mm-hmm.
I've got to set it up. I was trying to do it on my phone during the episode and it just wasn't working, so whatever. But I'm going to do, like, the Google survey. I want you guys to submit, like, favorite episodes, favorite quotes of yours, like, funny moments you had if you've interacted with us, like, just anything about the podcast that you have particularly loved in this last year. We would love to hear about that. And there will, cross my fingers, hopefully be a link somewhere out there to said survey.
And by somewhere out there, he means in the Facebook group and on our Twitter.
Mm-hmm. Correct. Yep. And so then go do that. And yes, you could submit multiple times or whatever. Yeah. Cool. So until next week, may the Force be with you.
Always.
I'm Anna Graves, and thank you for listening to a more civilized podcast.
My 3-year-old, on the other hand, no, don't cross that kid. He will cut you. And I'm not being figurative. Anyway, we've had to remove knives from his hands before when he was chasing after his brother. He's learned now that, like, no, that's dangerous. And he's like, oh, okay. So he doesn't do that anymore, that I've noticed. But we did have a few 2-year-old incidents of him like, I was like, how did he get that? Get that away from him. Anyway, we're good parents, I promise.
I'll try to look at Chris like this. Does that work?
Yeah, that's good.
Yes, it does.
Yeah.